My brother-in-law, David, was 33. He was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, and it was very well progressed. And about 6 months into his treatment, he was in the ICU. His heart rate was going crazy, and the doctor said, he has 48 hours to live. You should really let him go. And you're being mean for keeping him alive. We had done some research showing that he had CD33 protein on his AML cells. And my husband asked the doctor, can you give Mylotarg to him, which was the first antibody drug conjugate. It wasn't approved for his indication at the time. And they said, well, you have to call the inventor and ask him for permission. So Herb Bernstein at the Hutch was the inventor, and my husband's very type A. So he found his cell phone and he called him in a restaurant that night and got him on the phone with the head of oncology at Huntsman and said, will you give this to my brother? He said it should be fine. They gave it to him. 72 hours later, David was riding a stationary bike out of the hospital for another 6 months until he passed. And that 6 months was really meaningful to his family, obviously.
This is Cure Talks with Gary, and I am discussing bridging the gap in multiple myeloma survival with Jenny Ahlstrom, who is the founder of HealthTree Foundation. I'd like to open the meeting by saying that at least when I was diagnosed, I had looked around and there wasn't very much data on life expectancy, and being an engineer, I thought that was pretty odd. But I did find a couple, and one of which was Mayo Clinic said that for about 13 years prior to 2003, the average life expectancy was 33 months, and that hadn't changed in that 13-year period. At the same time, only one other place I could find had life expectancy that it published, and that was UAMS, University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and Dr. Bart Barloghi, and he had 7 years. So I had decided that what I'd do is I'd opt for living 7 years versus just 33 months. And so I went to UAMS, and when I was there, I read an article that Dr. Bart Barloghi had written, and it said that people with my type of myeloma, which had dialysis-dependent kidney failure, I think it was like 248 people that they looked at, the average life expectancy was 33 months. So now here, 17 years later, I feel pretty confident that I made the right decision in going to Arkansas from Florida, right next to Mayo Clinic. And so what I wanted to say is that I had thought, and I started my website because I thought that, and I wanted to see whether or not different places had different results. And so I went about doing that, but most people, like I said, don't do that. So I asked them to do that for me, and a number of them did. And I find that they had average life expectancy in the 8 to 10 year range, or even greater, and that the National Cancer Institute only had data that showed that people lived at a maximum at that time about 5 years. So there was a gap of about 5 years between the two. So my thoughts were that, if I could just tell people, who these people were, who these myeloma professionals were, that gap would close. But unfortunately, what I have found is that gap has not closed. It's still about 5 years. And so I'm frankly very disappointed and a little bit, and saddened that, now you can see people do agree, no matter where you go, that the life expectancy is in a 10-year range for a myeloma specialist. But unfortunately, that isn't represented for the entire population, which is still 5. So I was just trying to find an article some years ago that said, myeloma specialists don't grow on trees. And it was because, 15 to 20% of the patients went to one and the other 80% didn't. And perhaps that difference was the reason. So how do you fill that gap? And my thought was, well, like I said, I was quite disappointed, but I thought perhaps the way to do that is with what Jenny has been doing. And that is, she developed this HealthTree, and with HealthTree, you can kind of follow along with what the myeloma specialist that she has on her team would recommend for various types of chromosomal abnormalities or gene expression profile. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of highlight Jenny and Jenny's HealthTree organization, that she can help to fill that gap, because she too, has experienced a lot of the same things: inadequate care, slow to be identified as a patient. There's always that. And so I was just wanting her to go through some of the things that she might think her HealthTree format would allow to help close that gap. So Jenny, if you could touch base on some of this.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I kind of think about it in 5 steps, because when we were both diagnosed, Gary, it was longer ago, right? I was diagnosed in 2010 and you before me. And as we came into like trying to navigate our care for ourselves, we saw gaps that needed to be filled. You saw this outcome gap. I saw other gaps that really have an impact on the outcome gap. So I think I'd like to talk about it in 5 steps. You touched on the first step, but if we meet with other myeloma patients that are newly diagnosed, the first thing we tell them is find a myeloma specialist. So you mentioned the Mayo Clinic. There was data from the Mayo Clinic and the University of North Carolina that both showed that if you have a myeloma specialist in your corner, that you live longer. And that could be from 2 to 5 years longer. In my opinion, it might be much longer than that based on the kind of myeloma that you have and the kind of treatment that you get. But there is actual data showing that a myeloma specialist is really key. So when I was diagnosed, I was baffled. Why isn't there an online directory with myeloma specialists where you can go and connect with them or learn more about them and see more than just their name? Because there's not much to a name. So one of the gaps that I wanted to fill in getting that better care was to build a myeloma specialist directory. So on the HealthTree website, and you can go to healthtree.org/myeloma to find all these tools. But the first thing we did was create that directory because there's data around it. And Gary very nicely talked about why having a specialist on your team is so important, and it is. Whether you get treatment ongoing, because that's not always that easy to do. You don't live close to an academic center, you live in a rural area, or transportation is difficult, you can still go to that myeloma specialist and you can have them consult with your care when you're making treatment decisions. So that's the most important time. Whether they give you your infusion, your weekly infusion or every other week infusion or whatnot, that doesn't matter as much, just so you make sure you have somebody tracking your care and they can help you make key decision points, because I always think about it like this, that we're playing chess with our lives. So every move we make on a treatment option is an important move, and it should come from a well-educated decision-making process. So step number 2, in my opinion, is to educate yourself. because the more educated you are, the better questions you are going to ask your doctor, the more aware you're going to be about your own labs, the more aware you're going to be about treatment options. And so we started filling gaps in that education space. We created HealthTree University to build a complete platform for classes taught by myeloma experts. And now we have over 40 classes. We have over 600 video lessons, all taught by myeloma experts. And newly diagnosed patients say they'll binge watch their way through HealthTree University. And it goes from the basics to more complex topics. Doing that empowers you. Educating yourself empowers you. You can attend webinars. You can go to live meetings. You can start with myeloma basics articles. We have news on our website, which is why, I started reading, and everything was really the scientific papers that was being shared. So I didn't totally understand that as a newly diagnosed patient. So that's why we built the news website. We try to explain things in patient-friendly language. I think the third thing is to get involved in academic research and consider joining clinical trials. And Gary, you and I could probably talk for more than an hour about clinical trials. And I don't know if there's anything you want to highlight about them, but the importance of them before I continue.
Well, and I think that an academic center is the place that really has most all of the clinical trials, because for one thing, they have the resources in order to, to follow up on it, because I think it's probably much more now, but I think it was $11,000 per patient in order to do that. And, that's a lot of follow-up and a lot of paperwork and a lot of things like that you have to have on staff in order to follow it. So you don't find clinical trials all that often at anything other than, large institutions or academic centers. And so my belief is that that's one of the key reasons that you want to have a myeloma specialist on your team someplace, maybe not as your treating physician, but maybe it's somebody who has come up with a plan that the local oncologist can follow, if he's smart. So that's part of it. And I wrote an article some time ago, and it was, keeping one step ahead of the reaper. And it had to do with, I was following a young lady a while ago who, it seemed like every time she relapsed, she found another clinical trial. And it was always that step that saved her, that next
It's
new
true.
thing that saved her. Much like somebody I know, like Jenny Ahlstrom, who might have had one of the most significant new developments, and that's the CAR T, and seems to be doing pretty well for you. And you wouldn't have that opportunity if you didn't have a myeloma specialist kind of, focusing on getting
Right.
you. Yeah, that's part of that.
Right.
So, yeah.
And when I was newly diagnosed, I don't know why, but I assumed I would relapse quickly. I don't know why I had that feeling,
You're
but
high risk, were you?
yeah, I had a high risk feature, not on my FISH, but on a gene expression profile test.
Mhm.
And when I went to join clinical trials, first I looked at clinicaltrials.gov, which is a total mess of a website in terms of navigating. It's great for listing your clinical trials that industry has or investigators have or whatever, but it's terrible search experience for the user. But I ended up calling about 8 different trial sites, and I got a call saying, hey, I would be interested in joining your trial or learning more about it. I got a call back from 2, and it just made me think this is very challenging. So that's why I started the podcast about the clinic, the HealthTree podcast, because I didn't understand what are these trials all about. I didn't understand the drug names. I didn't know how they went together. I didn't know why I should be interested in this clinical trial. So just tell me why is this important to me? Why should I be joining clinical trials anyway? The more advanced you get in myeloma, the more you realize how myeloma is really special because there's so much development being done in multiple myeloma right now compared to other blood cancers and compared to other solid tumor cancers or other types of diseases. There is a lot of development. So when you think about going into a clinical trial, it's like getting a very promising therapy early. And that's why when I relapsed, I was looking at options and I met with multiple myeloma specialists, several myeloma specialists. I got different opinions from each specialist, which is not uncommon, but still confusing for patients. And I really had to go and do my homework. So I searched all the clinical trials to try to find what was available for me. And I found a CAR T option. Because I was an educated patient, because I had already done, 10 years of homework in doing the things that we do at HealthTree, I could gauge relevance. I could see, oh, this one had great survival compared to this one. And and it's not, and maybe it's all this logic that goes through your head, right? So what's my time in clinic? Is this a one-time therapy? And or what's the progression-free survival, or how long can I go without falling out of remission? And so you put all those things together in your mind. You kind of add your personal desires to that. Am I working? Am I retired? What's my physical status? And then you hopefully jointly make a decision with your doctor. And I decided to join a CAR T trial. It happened to be miraculously open at my center. I don't know how I lucked out with that. And then there was a 50-50 chance I would get into the treatment arm because it was a 2-arm trial. And I did get the CAR T arm, which, may not have happened. I did have just, there was a risk in not doing that, but I probably would have gone on to look for different trials had that not happened. And to me, it was much earlier access than I could have accessed that particular treatment years earlier than it would have been approved for me as a patient with the prior lines of therapy that I've had. So clinical trials are the way that we as patients can get involved and push research forward. So whatever tools you can use to find a clinical trial, I would suggest you use them. And look at that as a treatment option, whether you're a newly diagnosed patient or whether you're a relapse refractory patient. Doesn't matter. Clinical trials are always a really good option. That's why using a clinical trial finder is a really important thing to be able to do. So that's kind of like step number 3, consider joining clinical trials. Number 4 is kind of why you invited me to talk about this, but I want to share a story from my brother-in-law. So my brother-in-law, David, was 33. He and his wife were pregnant with their 6th child. Their oldest was 8 at the time. So they had a very young family. He was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And it was very well progressed. He had many side effects that were ignored that he didn't understand. He went into treatment at a general oncology center, and they said, you could do transplant now or later. Turns out you can't always do that. He had passed the blood-brain barrier, so transplant was out as an option for him. In the AML space at the time, this was 19 years ago, and there was very little development in the AML space comparatively to anything else, but especially myeloma. And about 6 months into his treatment, he was in the ICU. His heart rate was going crazy, and the doctor said, he has 48 hours to live. You should really let him go. And you're being mean for keeping him alive. We had done some research showing that he had CD33 protein on his AML cells. And my husband asked the doctor, can you give Mylotarg to him, which was the first antibody drug conjugate. It wasn't approved for his indication at the time. And they said, well, you have to call the inventor and ask him for permission. So Herb Bernstein at the Hutch was the inventor, and my husband's very type A. So he found his cell phone and he called him in a restaurant that night and got him on the phone with the head of oncology at Huntsman and said, will you give this to my brother? He said it should be fine. They gave it to him. 72 hours later, David was riding a stationary bike out of the hospital for another 6 months until he passed. And that 6 months was really meaningful to his family. Obviously, his daughter was born in that time frame, and it was a tragic, very emotional experience for our family. So when I was diagnosed, we had this idea for a HealthTree Cure Hub back during that time before I was diagnosed. Why did David's experience get lost to his peers? Why did that drug not get approved for another 14 years for that indication? Can't we move research faster? I mean, yes, we should be joining clinical trials. Yes, we should consider doing that, because that's how things progress in a disease, is if we do that and not just get treated on standard of care, which is good, but what's better? But it just didn't make sense that something like this, as basic as this, didn't exist. So when Gary was diagnosed, when I was diagnosed, we're all looking for data. Like, the myeloma experts are disagreeing on the treatment protocol. When I was diagnosed, and the fight at that time was single versus tandem transplant. Well, show me the data. Like, show me somebody who has the similar genetics to me, show me what they did for therapy, show me their outcomes. And you're telling me that this is my most important decision. You're not giving me any tools or data, except I just trust you as a myeloma specialist. My specialist had come from UAMS also. They were very well entrenched in the tandem transplant and doing induction, transplant, consolidation, and maintenance, which really nobody else was doing at that time. And so
And
they were
that
really
6 drug
pioneers.
combinations.
Yeah, they were kind of pioneers in the field, and now everybody does induction, transplant, consolidation, maintenance. Everybody kind of does that now, but at the time they didn't do that. So I feel like I lucked out by finding a specialist and then doing a protocol, because like David, I went to a general oncologist to get diagnosed, and they said the same thing. They were like, they hadn't even done a bone marrow biopsy. They're like, okay, we're going to start your treatment on Friday, and we can save transplant for later. And we're kind of thinking, oh, we've heard this story before. We are not doing that. We are, and then he kind of made the mistake of saying, don't call Huntsman because they'll have you doing tandem transplants. So of course, we hit the parking lot and we're on the phone with a specialist at Huntsman who's treating 600 cases of myeloma versus 5 at the General Oncology Center. So if you can imagine just the patient experience that they have under their belt in treating that many patients is so different. So we asked ourselves, when I was diagnosed, then we kind of went back to this idea that wouldn't it be amazing if patients were willing to share their data together so we could come to faster conclusions? And Paul shared this with his brother. Hey, I've got this great idea. It's called HealthTree. And he said, you already had this idea. He said, what are you talking about? Yeah, a few years ago, look in your email. And he looked in his email and he looked and found this pitch deck called HealthTree. So we had done that even before I was diagnosed. And interestingly, so we pursued it. First, we helped build community, and we created those tools that I felt like I had an immediate need, the specialist directory and the news website and the podcast and HealthTree University and things like that. In 2018, we decided it was time to go after this data idea. So we went on a 50-city tour and asked patients. We slept in our beds, I think, 5 days that whole summer. And we went to 50 cities. We met with support groups. We met with a single person. We met with a group of 10. We met with a group of 75. We met with all sorts of patients from all walks of life, all age ranges, all races, all areas, city, rural. And we showed them a potential tool and said, what do you think? Would you use a system like this? What are your potential objections? And they always ask, like, who are you? Why are you doing this? And what are you going to do with my data? Because we've all been conditioned from HIPAA to protect our data, and it's so important and so it needs to be so secure. We forgot that the P in HIPAA, one of the P's is for portability, and it was for the portability of data and not privacy of data. Because my data by itself is not that valuable. My data combined with Gary's, combined with 10 of our other myeloma friends, or now 10,000 myeloma friends, is much more valuable because now we can see patterns in care. And so we started that journey. We kept iterating over that whole tour. And really, people understood that as a patient myself, this is how we change the way research can be done. So all of a sudden, patients can not just join clinical trials, but they can answer common questions that researchers have. So we went to the recent IMS meeting, that's a myeloma meeting with specialists. And one of the big controversies was, do you use daratumumab, Revlimid, Velcade, Dex, or do you just use Revlimid, Velcade, Dex for induction therapy? And, you know, the Europeans were saying, well, we really need a big phase 3 clinical trial to study this with hundreds of patients. And the US folks were kind of saying, we already have enough data in some of these early trials. It's showing to be really good. We should just start using it earlier for newly diagnosed patients. So we went back to our database that now involves 11,000 myeloma patients to say which one is better. And they were presenting results from what was called the Griffin trial, which was testing that, you know, do you do DARA RVD versus RVD? And our data results showed similar outcomes. So in the real world, not just in a clinical trial, it was better to use the quad combination. So how many years of a clinical trial would that save? How much cost? How much time? And how could the investigators better prioritize what they choose to spend their time researching? Same thing for investigator questions. For example, one of the doctors at Huntsman wanted to know, what do patients think is a myeloma cure? What does that mean to you? Because it's kind of what more well established, maybe what a functional cure means in lymphoma. But in myeloma, it's not really well defined. So we were able to send a survey out. 1,500 patients responded to it, and they told the doctors, this is what it means, you know, and in priority. Does it mean going off therapy forever? But maybe not. Maybe a functional cure is staying on some kind of therapy where you're not experiencing a whole bunch of side effects. And that's kind of like, you know, number one would be no more disease, no more treatment, right? But no more disease or a controlled disease on low-level treatment with low side effects, that's number two. Being on therapy forever with lots of side effects, patients don't think that's called a cure. So hearing from the patient community, I asked the doctor, how long would that have taken you? And how much would that have cost you? And he said, that would have taken me over a year and a half because I have to go get agreements now. I can't get 1,500 patients at my own facility to answer that survey. So now I have to go do a multi-center kind of study. So I have to coordinate with the research coordinators at all those different centers. We have to have somebody create the survey, send it out, capture the results, do the stats analysis on it, and then, you know, publish on it potentially. We had that finished for free for him in about 6 weeks. And it was because patients are so generous, they want to get to a cure faster. Same thing, like Maury Gertz is wondering, why are amyloidosis patients getting such a delayed diagnosis? You can get, it's kind of like a different thing that can happen with myeloma, and you can get these protein buildups in your heart or your liver or your brain. And these patients really struggle to get an accurate diagnosis. So why is that? How many doctors did they have to see? We can facilitate that survey for him, and we're going to be doing that for free. So like if you think about like what Gary talks about, what are the low-hanging fruit type things that we can learn in a database like this? We can go back to CAR T patients. We'll be launching a CAR T survey and 3-year study pretty soon. Should we study what these patients had before CAR T, after CAR T? How many lines of prior treatment did they have before their CAR T? Who's getting better outcomes and why? Is it, what are their side effects before and after? Are there long-term things we should be worried about? Is the sequencing better if you do a bispecific antibody first versus a CAR T first? We can answer those types of questions with patients who are treated either on clinical trial or with commercial products if they join these types of surveys and studies. So last year we did I think collectively we've done about 35 surveys or studies. We'll probably accomplish, we have 35 open right now, and we'll probably complete, I would guess, up to 50 sometime this year, different projects like that, either looking at the data on the back end. We also try to share it back with patients so they know what we're doing with their data. It's all aggregated, so there are no names used on the data, but we're trying to see patterns. And even if nothing new was ever developed for myeloma again, we could improve care for people regardless of where they live, by just using this data for research. One other point about HealthTree Cure Hub is, as a patient, I didn't want to say, hey, just donate your data and we'll do something great with it in 20 years and we'll learn something cool and then maybe we'll share it back with you. Patients really needed to get value using this tool immediately. So what Gary mentioned earlier is the ability to see treatment options that are customized for you personally, and it's based on, like, let's say you're a newly diagnosed patient, you're going to see different treatment options than if you had relapsed and been on prior lines of therapy. So we have logic in the system that kind of filters things out based on what line of therapy you've used. And with the goal, Rafael Fonseca from the Mayo Clinic is the one who came up with that benefit, because just what Gary said at the beginning, patients were not getting treated as if they were getting treated by a specialist. So he said, why don't you kind of democratize that, show those treatment options so patients see how an expert might treat you, and then you can go have a conversation with your doctor. Why would you do this combination versus this combination? When should I do a clinical trial? Either like maybe I do CAR T earlier in lines of therapy, or do I do a bispecific right now? Do I wait on that and don't use that target quite yet? Or what's the whole strategy here? So we have other benefits, like you can find clinical trials also. You can find your twin. So if you wanted to do what I wanted to do at the beginning, you can say, I have these genetic features, I've been on these prior lines of therapy, show me all the people in the database that look like that. You can see that list. It's all de-identified, so you can't see who that person is. But we had a chat feature and we revamped everything, and so we have to bring the chat feature back to be able to connect those two patients together. So you can see, I can kind of do that research now that I wanted to do when I was diagnosed. Show me everybody that looks like me, show me what they got for therapy, how long did they stay in remission, what were their side effects, and what are their genetics. And that's our treatment. We have a treatment options kind of section. And a twin, we call it the twin machine. Go ahead, Gary.
I think that's very, very important that that's available. And as one thing I was thinking was, why doesn't every oncologist or hematologist oncologist, go to that site to begin with, to look at what the options are. in the last year, and it's probably because I was somewhat disappointed that that gap doesn't seem to close. And what am I really doing to get that to close? And is it worth the effort? That, then I thought, well, if in fact you can get that information to their doctors, their
Mm-hmm.
hematologists, their patients, that could go a long way to fill the knowledge gap. And the knowledge gap is what creates the life expectancy gap. So
I agree.
that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you today, that I just don't understand in my own mind why, if you can't be with a myeloma specialist because they don't grow on trees, there's 15% of the people have a myeloma
Mm-hmm.
specialist. You call them up today. Some of them say, I'll see you in 3 months. I'll see you in, whenever, for the longest time. And you can't wait that long.
Yeah.
The local oncologist wants you to start with Revlimid and dexamethasone the first day. And when I backed away, I found that, it's kind of like, you're in a car next to a train, right? And the train is, the cures and all the new stuff going on. And if you're in your car and you're zooming along and you're looking over there, you're keeping up with what's going on every day. All of the neat things, the CAR T, the bispecifics, the antibody drug conjugates, and all those things. But I tell you what, you stop your car and that stuff just goes flying by. You have no clue what's going on in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and with multiple myeloma at the speed of which it's going right now and all the things associated with it, if you don't keep up to date, and nobody can, a local oncologist, he's going to see breast cancer, DCIS, and
Right.
standard procedure for that. Or you got kidney cancer, they'll go in and slice it out and then take some radiotherapy, and assuming that's it. But with myeloma, that train is just going so fast. And not only that, if you look, like you said, to other types of diseases, once you get, 90% of them aren't metastatic, 90% of them are easier to treat, and you don't necessarily have to have a specialist involved. Myeloma is not that way. When you get it, you're already metastatic, and I see that in that my sister-in-law, she just found out that she has got metastatic breast cancer. It's in her liver, and they're not giving her much of an opportunity, but then I look at her current treatment happens to be with two new drugs that have been developed and approved in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
anybody
Take advantage
who's
of the
not
new
keeping
stuff.
up to date with that, huh?
No, I know. Yeah, no, it takes several years for the community practices to catch up with how myeloma experts are treating. So the community experts are not treating. I don't know how it's humanly possible to treat that many cancers, and they're doing an amazing job for what they have to work with. But just the sheer volume of information, like you're saying, is changing so fast and so quickly. So we are, outside of the foundation, we are working on kind of flipping this around and providing clinical decision support tools for the clinicians, using the data that patients are contributing. Because, when we first started this, that was our thought. Let's provide tools to the general oncologists. And when we went and did those interviews, they said, we know how to treat myeloma.
Right.
And, I don't want to be insulting to anybody who's trying to help patient care, but it's really humanly impossible. And the data shows that they are not treating it in the same way. They are not having the same outcomes. And myeloma is very nuanced. There are different types of myeloma. I mean, how can a clinician treat my myeloma from without doing a bone marrow biopsy to even see what kind of myeloma that I had. And had I done that, I would not have any disease left. And I would have no clue what I was kind of working with. And my doctor would always say, you know, you're fighting a war, so you need to understand your enemy. Even things like the basics like that, were the right tests run, were the right genetics testing understood? Are we treating for that disease? Are we treating for a standard risk disease? Are we treating for a more aggressive disease? How do we do that? So we started by providing these tools to the patients. Like, the thing that patients love the most about it in HealthTree Cure Hub is they love contributing to the research, but they also love seeing a whole dashboard about their disease, because it's easier to use than like a MyChart or, you know, whatever portal they're logging into. And they can watch their labs track over time. They can be automatically imported and things like that. So, but that all contributes to the data that we all need to be able to make these key treatment decisions. You know, which patients are doing better on Blenrep, which patients are doing better on selinexor, which patients are doing better after stem cell transplant, for which patients does stem cell transplant not work? I mean, there's so many questions that need to be answered. And when you look at clinical trial development, pharma companies are focused on moving new therapies into the clinic. And that is their primary focus. That is their job. That's what they're going to pay for a clinical trial to have happen. A lot of these ancillary questions that could help patients today are not being asked because their focus is on getting drugs through. So who's there to pay for the study of the investigator and their time and their research team and their stats people? Well, that's the NCI and people like that, but that funding is very limited, and you have to apply for it, and you have to prioritize as an investigator of what you're actually going to study. But if we can increase the pace of this kind of research, this very practical, real world research, we could come to a lot of conclusions very, very quickly. So what we're working on right now is two things, you know, flipping those tools around for the clinician so they would have access to um, data sources that would be informing the decisions. So instead of having a group of myeloma experts get together and say, well, this is the treatment path I would follow, you could either pull clinical trial data, and that could be one of your data sets that you use. You could pull actual data and in aggregate and use one of those. You could pull twin match data and just see, okay, for this type of patient who has this type of genetics, who's had this prior therapy, this treatment path might be the best. And automating that is kind of the next step. And that's where I think the general oncologist would say, okay, you're showing me the data, you're showing me the resources, where you're pulling the data from. The data is accurate and it makes sense. So let's all use these new tools. And even the experts in the myeloma space are developing these new models. You know, you have the University of Miami developing genetic-based treatment models. You have other groups in Germany that we are working with and that are working on the same types of things. So this is kind of the next level of care for patients, even from experts, but bringing that to everyone in the general oncology clinic so they can treat as if they were a myeloma expert without spending their life studying myeloma is like the golden ticket, right?
Mhm.
That would be
Does,
amazing.
does HIPAA get in the way of that in any way? Uh, for
Well,
you
I think
and
once,
your organization?
not on the,
I know for,
no,
you
it
know,
doesn't, no.
okay, well, that's
It,
fantastic because
no, it
that's
doesn't.
really a huge, sticking point. I mean, drug companies can't even tell you that, they have, you know, copay programs, I believe. They can't tell, at least they can't tell people who are on Medicare, They just
Right,
can't.
right, right. Uh-huh. Yeah, they have
So
limitations. No, it's a
yeah,
highly regulated industry on their side. And the doctors are concerned about HIPAA violations because once data comes out of their facility, if they process claims or they're prescribing, that's when HIPAA kicks in. Patients can choose to do with their data what they want to do with their data. And we tell patients that participate in HealthTree Cure Hub, you own this data. If you want to pull your data out anytime, tell us, we do it. We've only had maybe 5 people out of 11,000 to ever do that, but it's possible because the patient owns their data. We don't own their data. They are in charge of it. They own it. It's theirs, and that's how we look at it. And but the group joint venture, I guess I would call it, is one is just joining together to make research, new kinds of research possible. And in the past, their patients have never been given the tools, the data tools or the software tools or whatnot to be able to actually participate in a credible, accurate way. I just have one more thing, like step number 5 is um, I think step number 5 is share, because what you said earlier, Gary, is, we're making progress in myeloma. We don't see some of the length of life is increasing, so that's all good. But we know plenty of patients who are not involved at all in using these tools, right? And they don't know about them and they're not aware of them. So, number 5 is get involved and share. If you know family members, tell them that you're involved, tell them you have myeloma, tell them about resources. I just consulted with a patient whose dad was just diagnosed with myeloma, and it was so wonderful to be able to tell them about the different resources and how to find a specialist. And so share, share, and share is number 5. So talk to people when you go to the clinic. Have your family members share what's available. And that is really how we're going to make a difference in multiple myeloma outcomes.
When I look at what you're doing, it seems to me that getting back to the harder to treat diseases, and what I mean by that is anything that has turned metastatic. Because, when we get myeloma, it's kind of all over our body. It's in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our brain, it's every place. And when other cancers finally break out, they are looking a lot like what myeloma is today. And that's why some of the things that we've done in myeloma are now being used in some of the other diseases, like the solid tumors, and the fact that because other diseases are starting to mirror myeloma being metastatic and all, you see this platform, this type of format being used, much like a template for other diseases.
Yeah, so because of that, we thought so too. And we knew this could be used. And when we've showed this to multiple groups, they all say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that exists. We would love for that to exist in our disease. We did a video about it and we got requests for like 50 diseases to do this in. So
Wow.
we actually took the whole platform, picked it up, moved it over, and started it in AML and in MDS and in CLL. And really, it could be replicated in 100 different diseases if we had the bandwidth on the program side to be able to lead that. But technically, we can do that easily, quickly. And we started a whole AML division in less than 6 months. We started a new website. We can have a website up in a week, and it's not that hard technically now because we have the program and it's all completely integrated.
And with that, I see that the gap exists for anybody who is metastatic, no matter what their disease is. And as a result, this could save so many lives, just like it could close the gap with multiple myeloma. And so, you know, that's certainly one of the reasons I wanted to get you on again. I just, you know, to me, what you're doing is the answer, you know, and everybody needs to be able to access that answer. So thank you, Jenny. I really do appreciate everything that you do. And like I said in the past, you are, you know, the energizer, Jenny. I can't believe you're doing what you're doing and getting treatment. You wear me out watching you.
Well, it's been so fun because I had a background in tech, and so I wasn't afraid of the tech. My husband has a background in entrepreneurship, so we really treated my myeloma like a startup, and we are able to apply the skills and to create new tools. Like if you want a different outcome, you need to approach it in a different way. So now we've deployed these new tools to solve this really, really important life-threatening problem. And it's so fun to be able to do it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, great to have you, Jenny. Thank you.